live with you.
Thank you. Chilling new details in the killing of Coral Springs Vice Mayor Nancy Metayer Brown.
Her husband now charged with her murder as we learn the shocking admission that he apparently made about a possible motive. Local 10's Ray Ramos is live in Coral Springs today with the very latest. Roy.
Calvin and Nicole, on that person who he allegedly confessed to then went to police. That person telling police that the suspect allegedly told him that he shot and killed his wife because he couldn't take it anymore.
He walked into his uncle's house, looked him dead in the face and said, "I shot my wife. I couldn't take it anymore." That's it. No breakdown, no tears running down his face, no shaking hands, just 5 words delivered like a man who had already made his peace with what he did. And while he was standing there saying that, back at the house on Northwest 127th Avenue in Coral Springs, Florida, Nancy Metayer Bowen was still upstairs, wrapped in blankets, stuffed inside heavy-duty garbage bags. She had been there since the night before. Let me tell you something. Nancy wasn't just anybody's wife. She was the vice mayor of Coral Springs. She was the first Black and Haitian American woman ever elected to the Coral Springs City Commission. She was weeks, maybe even days, away from announcing that she was running for the United States Congress. And the man who shot her 3 times with a shotgun was the man sleeping in their home while her body lay in the room above him. This is the story of Nancy Metayer Bowen, and we are just getting started. To really understand the weight of what happened in that house, you have to understand who Nancy was, because she wasn't just a name on a ballot. She was a whole movement walking around in one person. Nancy Metayer Bowen was 38 years old, a Florida girl through and through. She went to Florida A&M University, a proud rattler, and she carried that energy with her into every single room she ever walked into. If you've ever been to an HBCU, you know the kind of person we're talking about. The one who's always put together, always prepared, always the most intentional person in the space. Her favorite color was orange, vibrant, loud, unapologetic orange. And that wasn't an accident. Orange was the color of her alma mater. Orange was her way of saying, I see where I came from and I am not hiding it. At community events, she'd show up draped in it. She wanted you to see her. And more importantly, she wanted you to know she wasn't going anywhere. In 2020, she made history. She became the first Black and Haitian American woman elected to the Coral Springs City Commission. Girl, in a city like Coral Springs, that was not a small thing. She didn't just crack a door open, she walked through it and held it open for everyone behind her. From there, she rose to vice mayor, then to vice chair of the Florida Democratic Party. She was a researcher, an environmental advocate, a public servant in the truest sense of the word. And at the time of her death, the people around her knew she was getting ready for something bigger. She was quietly, and not so quietly, laying the groundwork to run for the U.S. House of Representatives. She had her eye on a congressional seat. The political community in Florida was watching her. The momentum was real. The support was building. She was the kind of candidate that comes around once in a generation. But here's the part that nobody talks about enough. About 3 months before she was killed, Nancy had buried her brother. She was grieving, carrying a personal loss that most people would have used as a reason to step back, to take time to breathe. But Nancy kept showing up. She kept voting on policy. She kept planning. She kept serving her constituents, even while carrying that grief in her chest every single day. She was holding the weight of an entire community on one shoulder and the weight of losing her brother on the other. And she didn't let either of them take her down. That's who Nancy was. That's the woman we're talking about. A woman at the height of everything she had worked for. And yet, in her own home, behind the door she walked through every night, she was not safe. She was not protected. The person who was supposed to be her partner, her safe place, was, according to investigators, the greatest threat to her life. Make it make sense. Now, let's talk about Stephen Bowen, because one of the things that makes this case so difficult to sit with is that Stephen wasn't some stranger. He wasn't a man with a long, violent history that people could point to and say, well, we saw that coming. No, Stephen Bowen was 40 years old. He was the chief operating officer of a local nonprofit, a man who understood management, systems, responsibility. He had a background as a radiology technician. By every public measure, he was a professional, a put-together man. He was Nancy's husband. And on the night of Tuesday, March 31st, according to investigators, something in Stephen Bowen made a decision that cannot be undone. The evening didn't start with the confrontation. It started with a phone call. Around 10 p.m., Stephen called his mother. And the story he told her was that he was not doing well. He told her he was having a severe panic attack, that he couldn't breathe, that he was struggling. He told her he was going to go talk to Nancy about it, that he needed to be with his wife. Now, was that call a genuine cry for help? Or was it a calculated first move? A way to make sure someone could later say he was struggling that night. He wasn't himself. That question we cannot answer for you. You'll have to sit with it. What we do know is what happened after that call. It didn't lead to a hospital. It didn't lead to a long conversation that ended in resolution. What it led to was a shotgun. Somewhere inside that house on Northwest 127th Avenue, Stephen Bowen picked up a shotgun and shot his wife 3 times. Oh, so now the panic attack becomes a murder. And this is the part that stops you cold. He didn't call 911. He didn't flee. He didn't drive to a police station. He wrapped Nancy's body in blankets and garbage bags in their master bedroom. And then he walked downstairs and went to sleep. He went to sleep in the same house, with his wife's body upstairs, in a room where the walls had just been torn through by gunfire. He went to sleep. Make it make sense. Somebody, please make it make sense. Here is the detail that changes the entire picture of this story, and I need you to really hear this one. Between August of 2023 and April of 2026, Coral Springs police had been called to that house 5 or 6 times. 5 or 6 times. Now, the sources are careful to note that not all of those calls have been publicly confirmed as domestic disturbance calls, but for a department that handles domestic violence cases daily. When you hear that officers had been to a couple's home that many times over roughly 2.5 years, and then the wife ends up dead inside that home, that detail matters. It changes how you read everything that came before it. Because this means that the home on Northwest 127th Avenue was not an unknown address. It was not a house that nobody had ever checked on. People in some capacity had been called there before, and Nancy was still inside that house when the worst possible thing happened to her. This is why on this channel we talk about domestic violence the way we do, because the story almost never starts with the worst moment. There are always moments before, signs before, calls before, and somehow, the worst moment still finds its way through the door. Anyways, let's get into what happened the morning after. So let's go back to that night. Tuesday, March 31st. The neighborhood is quiet. Coral Springs at night is the kind of quiet that feels earned. Manicured lawns, porch lights on timers, families inside, everybody winding down. Nothing about the outside of that house on Northwest 127th Avenue would have told you anything was wrong. But inside, according to investigators, Stephen Bowen was not winding down. He had a shotgun, and he had something else, something that tells you this was not a moment where a man just lost his mind and grabbed the nearest thing. This was thought through. He had a pillow. Not just any pillow, a pillow that he had tied with string, wrapped tight. The kind of thing you do when you are trying to solve a problem. And the problem, it seems, was noise. Because a shotgun is loud. A shotgun fired inside a house in a quiet neighborhood at night. That is the kind of sound that brings neighbors to their windows. That brings people outside. That brings 911 calls within minutes. So he wrapped a pillow around the barrel and tied it with string, intending to muffle the sound. A makeshift silencer. Improvised, deliberate. Let me tell you something. A panic attack does not come with a plan. A panic attack does not stop to find string. Whatever Stephen Bowen was feeling that night, he was feeling it clearly enough to think about the noise. Clearly enough to prepare. Clearly enough to make sure that what he was about to do stayed inside those walls. He fired 3 rounds, 3 shots from that shotgun right there in the master bedroom where Nancy was. 3. And here's where the plan fell apart. Because pillow and some string are no match for a shotgun blast. The physics simply do not cooperate. The force behind each of those rounds was so powerful that it didn't just strike Nancy. The shots tore through the interior walls of the house, punched through the structural layers, and kept going, right through the exterior stucco and out the other side. Debris from the second floor wall ended up scattered on the grass outside. The neighborhood may not have heard it the way Stephen hoped, but the house recorded every single shot. Moving on, because what Stephen did next is the part of this story that is hardest to process. After the shooting, he wrapped Nancy's body, blankets, heavy-duty garbage bags, her body. The vice mayor of Coral Springs, a woman who had spent her entire career being seen, being heard, being present for her community, was wrapped up and hidden in their own master bedroom. And then he wrapped the shotgun shells too. 3 spent shells recovered later by investigators, also wrapped in blankets near her body. Like he was trying to bundle up every piece of evidence that said what had just happened in that room. Then he walked out of that bedroom, down the stairs, and he went to sleep somewhere else in that house. I said what I said. He went to sleep. The walls around him still had holes in them. His wife was upstairs, and Stephen Bowen closed his eyes and slept through the night in the same house where he had just taken her life. There are moments in these cases where one detail separates a crime of sudden rage from something far more deliberate. Investigators will tell you the same thing. The string on that pillow, the blankets around those shells, the garbage bags, going to sleep. Each one of those choices on its own could maybe be explained away. But all of them together paint a picture of a man who was not spiraling out of control. A man who was managing a situation. Period. Wednesday morning came, April 1st. Coral Springs City Hall, Nancy's colleagues started checking their phones, then checking again. Nancy Metayer Bowen did not miss meetings. That was not something she did. So, when her chair sat empty and her phone went to voicemail, people noticed. Concern turned into alarm fast. Officers were sent to the house on Northwest 127th Avenue for a welfare check. Standard procedure. Go knock on the door, make sure she's okay, probably a medical situation. But when they pulled up to that house and looked up at the second floor, they stopped. The exterior wall of the master bedroom had holes in it. Not cracks, not damage from weather. Holes. And on the grass below, debris. Chunks of the wall scattered on the lawn like the house had coughed them out. Officers didn't need to cross the threshold to know this was not a medical situation. SWAT was called. The house was breached, and when they made it into that master bedroom, they found Nancy, wrapped in blankets, inside heavy-duty garbage bags. She had been shot 3 times with a shotgun, and on the bed, the pillow, still there, tied with string. Burn marks on the fabric from the barrel heat and the force of the discharge. Investigators recognized immediately what they were looking at. This was not bedding caught up in a struggle. This was constructed, intentional. Someone had sat down and built this thing before pulling that trigger. Near Nancy's body, they recovered 3 spent shotgun shells, and like everything else in that room, they hadn't just been left on the floor. They had been wrapped in blankets too, as if covering them up would cover up what they represented. Like, the shells are wrapped, the body is wrapped, the whole room is wrapped, and the man who did all of this wrapping is nowhere in the house. Because by the time SWAT breached that bedroom, Stephen Bowen had already been gone for hours. Surveillance footage from the neighborhood fills in the timeline. The morning after the shooting, Stephen was captured on camera returning to the house around 9:55 a.m., standing near the front door, phone to his ear, looking for all the world like a man just starting his Wednesday. He stayed inside for just over 2 hours. Investigators believe that window of time was spent doing exactly what the evidence inside suggested, finalizing things, making sure the room looked the way he needed it to look. Then, at 12:09 p.m., his black Ford F-150 backed out of the driveway, and he drove south to Plantation, Florida, to his uncle's house. He wasn't going to a police station. He wasn't turning himself in. He was going to family, and he was bringing the shotgun with him in a firearm carrying case because he needed someone to hold on to it for him. But here's where the story shifts, because the uncle, when Stephen showed up at his door and told him what he had done, the uncle did not just take that bag and stay quiet. He called 911. And on that call, the uncle told the dispatcher exactly what Stephen had confessed to him. That Bowen had come to his home and told him, "I shot my wife. I couldn't take it anymore." 5 words. And just like that, the whole carefully managed aftermath came undone.
If her husband came to my house this morning and told me that he did something to her.
Okay, her husband?
Is he alive? He said no.
By the time that 911 call came in from the uncle, law enforcement was already moving. The welfare check that morning had already set things in motion. Officers had already seen the holes in that second-floor wall. They had already found Nancy. They already knew what they were dealing with. So, when the uncle picked up that phone and told the dispatcher that Stephen Bowen had come to his door and confessed, that call didn't start the investigation. It confirmed it, and it gave them exactly what they needed to close the net. Multiple law enforcement agencies, Coral Springs, Fort Lauderdale, Plantation Police, had already established surveillance around the area where Stephen was. License plate readers along State Road 7 and US 441 had already flagged his black Ford F-150. They knew where he was. They were watching, and they were waiting for the right moment. But before they moved in, the cameras caught something that made the picture even clearer. In a parking lot near the Landmark Towers apartment complex in Plantation, surveillance footage captured Stephen pulling his truck alongside another man. He reached into the vehicle and handed over a heavy gray and black bag, the kind of bag that witnesses would later describe as a firearm carrying case. The shotgun, the same one that had been used to kill Nancy. He was passing it off, getting rid of it. While that man carried the bag into an apartment building, Stephen calmly reached back into his truck and started moving boxes of ammunition into his vehicle. Oh, so now he's doing inventory in a parking lot after confessing to his uncle, after his wife's body had already been found. The level of composure in that moment is something investigators noted. This was not a man falling apart. This was a man still trying to manage the situation, still calculating, still moving pieces, but the pieces had already been counted. SWAT descended on that parking lot. Tactical units, flashing lights, the kind of coordinated law enforcement response that leaves no room for a second exit. And when officers approached Stephen Bowen, according to those present, his reaction was 3 words. "Oh shit, they're here for me." Not confusion, not "what's going on, officers?" not "is everything okay?" He knew exactly why they were there. And those 3 words confirmed it just as clearly as the 5 he had said to his uncle an hour before. He was taken into custody right there in that parking lot. No standoff, no chase, just handcuffs clicking shut on a Wednesday afternoon in Plantation, Florida, while a community 40 minutes away was just beginning to understand that their vice mayor was gone. Stephen Bowen was booked into the Broward County main jail. He was charged with first-degree premeditated murder and tampering with physical evidence. He is being held without bond. His initial public defender moved to withdraw from the case, citing potential conflicts, personal and professional ties to the victim and the community that made representation complicated. That alone tells you something about how tightly Nancy Metayer Bowen was woven into the fabric of that city. Even in the legal machinery of her husband's defense, her presence could not be separated out. Anyways, as for motive, no official motive has been confirmed by police, but the people watching this case closely have not been quiet about what they noticed. Nancy was on the edge of a congressional run. She was days, maybe hours, from making that announcement public. Her career was ascending in a way that was impossible to ignore. And Stephen Bowen's career, by comparison, had plateaued. Stable, yes, but stationary. While she was preparing to take her voice to Washington, D.C., he was, according to investigators, preparing something else entirely. Whether that tension was the breaking point, that is not for us to decide. But we'd be doing this story a disservice if we didn't name the pattern. Because in domestic violence cases, the moment a victim's power grows is often the most dangerous moment of their life. The research backs that up. Advocates have been saying it for years. When a woman rises, when she starts taking up more space, earning more respect, moving towards something bigger, that is when the person who wants to control her feels the most threatened. Nancy Metayer Bowen was rising, and she was killed at the exact moment her rise could no longer be ignored. Make it make sense, because we have been trying to. A few days after Nancy's body was found, the lawn of Coral Springs City Hall filled up with people. They brought candles, they brought flowers, and they brought color, orange and green, everywhere you looked. Orange for Nancy. Her color. The color she wore to every community event. The color of Florida A and M. The color of a woman who refused to be invisible. And green for the environment she spent her career protecting. The causes she showed up for even when nobody was watching. Colleagues came. Community members came. Young people she had mentored came. Jared Moskowitz was there. The flags at City Hall flew at half-staff, and in that crowd of hundreds under the Florida sky, people held their candles and tried to find the words for what it feels like to lose someone like Nancy. They called it a celebration of life, but what it really was a refusal to let her be reduced to the way she died. A refusal to let the garbage bags and the blankets and the master bedroom be the last image. Because Nancy Metayer Bowen was more than that. She was more than this case. She was a daughter of Florida who made history and was still in the middle of making more of it when she was taken. But hey, we also have to say the hard thing out loud, because that is what this channel is for. Nancy Metayer Bowen should not have died in her own home. Police had been to that address before. The signs were there in some form, and still, the worst happened. That is not a coincidence. That is a pattern. A pattern that plays out in homes across this country every single day. In houses that look perfectly fine from the outside, on streets that seem perfectly quiet at night. The people most at risk are not always the ones who look like they need saving. Sometimes they are the ones holding offices, leading meetings, wearing their favorite color to work, and carrying their grief with dignity while they plan their next move. Sometimes they are the ones everyone is counting on. And sometimes the danger is already inside the house. If you are in a relationship where you do not feel safe, please reach out to the National Domestic Violence Hotline. You do not have to explain it perfectly. You do not have to have a plan. You just have to make the call. For Nancy Metayer Bowen. For every woman who deserved better than what happened inside her own home. This has been Next Door Archives. We'll see you on the next one.